The morning light slid through the lace curtains in soft, fractured beams, landing across the wooden kitchen table, where Elaine Turner sat with her coffee. She held the mug in both hands, letting the warmth seep into her skin as if it could fill the spaces her husband once occupied. The house was quiet, but not lonely. On the fridge, drawings from her granddaughter, bright suns, crooked flowers, a stick figure labeled Grandma, pinned grocery lists and old photographs in place. Every detail in that kitchen carried history. The worn edge of the counter where her late husband always leaned, the slow tick of the clock her father gave her when she bought the house 40 years ago, the faint smell of lavender from the sachets she tucked into drawers. Elaine was 62, her hair silvering but still thick, braided neatly into a crown at the back of her head. Years of standing in front of classrooms had shaped her posture. Straight-backed, unyielding, but her voice, when she spoke, carried the calm rhythm of someone who had learned patience the hard way. She had retired from her role as principal at Carver Elementary 5 years earlier, but retirement for Elaine was never rest. It was mentoring the neighborhood kids with college essays at her dining room table. It was driving an elderly neighbor to her doctor's appointment. It was walking the cracked sidewalks of her block with her granddaughter, telling her stories about the town before strip malls and fast food chains swallowed its edges. This morning, she was humming an old hymn, low under her breath, when the sound of sneakers on the porch broke the silence. Malik, one of her unofficial students, stepped into the doorway holding a stack of crumpled papers. He was 16 tall, already hard in the eyes, though his voice still cracked sometimes. "Miss Turner," he said, breathless, "I tried, but I don't get this essay thing." Elaine looked up, half a smile touching her lips. "Sit down, baby. Let's take a look together." She patted the chair across from her. As he spread the papers out, she adjusted her glasses and scanned the words. His handwriting was rushed, but his thoughts had weight, about his mother working double shifts, about wanting to be the first in his family to go to college. She placed a hand gently over the paper. "Don't you see? You already have your essay. It's right here. You just have to trust that your voice matters." Malik leaned back, doubtful, but something in her steady gaze softened him. He nodded slowly. Elaine smiled, a quiet victory she had won countless times before with children who thought the world had no place for them. Later, after Malik left, her daughter Alicia stopped by in her nurse's scrubs, rushing as usual. She kissed her mother's cheek, grabbed a container of soup from the fridge, and called out, "You're the only reason I eat real food anymore." Elaine laughed, shaking her head, the sound filling the kitchen. For a moment, the house felt alive again, bustling like it used to when her children were small. When evening came, Elaine settled into her garden, her hands in the soil, the earth cool and rich beneath her fingers. Rows of roses leaned toward the setting sun, and she thought of her husband, how he used to say her garden was proof that stubbornness could be beautiful. Her granddaughter ran circles through the yard, chasing fireflies, squealing in delight. Elaine leaned back in her chair, breathing in the scent of earth and blossoms. Life, for all its bruises, still held sweetness. She had built her world on dignity, on quiet service, on a belief that patience could outlast cruelty. She did not yet know that patience would soon be tested, in a courthouse where roses did not grow, and where the soil was harder, colder, unwilling to yield. The courthouse stood like a relic of another century, its white columns rising against a cloudless sky, the paint flaking at the edges, as if the building itself knew it was pretending to be eternal. Elaine Turner paused at the foot of the wide stone steps, clutching the folded summons in her hand. She had never been called for jury duty before, not in all her years in this town, though she had sat in those pew-like benches countless times as a principal, testifying for troubled students who found themselves pulled into the justice system too young. Now, at 62, she would sit not as an advocate, not as a teacher, but as a citizen asked to serve. Inside, the air was cool, tinged with polish and dust, the kind of smell old buildings carried like memory. Wooden pews lined the lobby, and portraits of past judges hung along the walls. Stern white faces, each painted with the same grim mouth and distant gaze. Elaine moved slowly toward the clerk's window, her shoes tapping against the marble floor. The woman behind the glass didn't look up right away. When she finally did, her expression sharpened. "Summons?" the clerk asked flatly. Elaine slid the folded paper across the counter. The clerk unfolded it, scanned it, then pursed her lips. "You're supposed to be in Courtroom B. You're late." Elaine checked her watch. 8:50. The summons had clearly read 9 o'clock. "I'm actually early," she said, her voice even. The clerk gave a thin smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, you better hurry then. They don't like people strolling in whenever they please." She shoved a stack of forms toward Elaine, papers crinkling under the glass slot. Elaine took them, nodding once, her composure unbroken. She had heard that tone before, in teachers who doubted her students, in store clerks who followed her too closely down aisles, in parents who questioned how a black woman could lead their children's school. It was a kind of dismissal wrapped in civility, sharp enough to cut without leaving a visible wound. As Elaine walked down the hallway, she passed a pair of lawyers talking in hushed tones. One, a tall white man with a slick-back head of hair, glanced at her, then leaned closer to his colleague, smirking. She caught only fragments. Wonder if she even knows what voir dire means, before the sound dissolved into the echo of her footsteps. She didn't slow. Courtroom B was already buzzing. Potential jurors sat scattered across benches, some whispering, some scrolling their phones. At the front, Judge Harold Whitmore presided from his high bench. He was in his late 50s, his hair white, his presence commanding in the way of men who had never been told no. Elaine recognized the name. His father and grandfather had been judges before him, their portraits no doubt among the stern faces in the lobby. Elaine found her seat in the jury box, setting her purse gently at her feet. She smoothed the hem of her skirt, lifted her chin, and folded her hands in her lap. The wood beneath her was cool, and she let herself breathe into the silence inside her body, the silence she had cultivated after decades of standing firm in rooms where she wasn't wanted. Then the late arrival came, a white man in his 40s, winded, briefcase swinging, muttering apologies. The bailiff guided him toward the jury box. The judge's eyes flicked from the man to Elaine. His voice rang out, deep and certain, filling every corner of the room. "Mrs. Turner, I believe you're in the wrong seat. Please step down so we can accommodate the gentleman." The words dropped heavy into the room. Conversation stilled. Eyes shifted toward her. Elaine felt the weight of them pressing, waiting to see what she would do. Her fingers tightened slightly around each other, but her face remained calm. Slowly, she gathered her purse, rose from her seat, and looked at the judge. "I'll wait right here," she said softly, moving toward the gallery but not leaving the room. Gasps flickered at the edges of the crowd. The late juror smirked as he slid into the seat Elaine had vacated. The judge gave a curt nod, already moving on, as though the decision meant nothing. But Elaine sat straighter on the wooden bench, her back against the wall, her eyes steady on proceedings. She knew this moment was more than insult. Something in the air had shifted, like the faint roll of thunder far off across the horizon. The trial began with a shuffle of papers and the low murmur of lawyers rearranging themselves at their tables. The defendant, a boy no older than 16, sat hunched beside his public defender. His suit was too big for him, the sleeves swallowing his hands, and his shoes looked borrowed, polished unevenly as if someone had tried their best with what little they had. His name was Devin Carter. Elaine caught it when the clerk read the charges: theft, resisting arrest, destruction of property. Her chest tightened. She had seen Devin before, at the schoolyard, playing basketball with Malik and the other neighborhood boys. She remembered him smiling once, grinning as he landed a shot from the three-point line. The boy sitting in front of her now was not smiling. His eyes darted from the judge to the floor, as if trying to disappear. The prosecutor, District Attorney Claire Hensley, rose with the grace of someone who owned the room, blonde hair neatly pinned, pearl earrings flashing under the fluorescent lights. She addressed the jury with crisp authority. She painted Devin as a troublemaker, a repeat offender, someone the community needed protection from. Her words slid easily into old grooves, echoing decades of fear and suspicion cast over black boys in this county. Elaine watched, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her pulse steady but strong. She had heard stories whispered among parents, how Hensley pursued harsher charges for black youth, how plea deals were dangled like bait only to be withdrawn at the last minute. Sitting in that courtroom, Elaine realized she was watching the machinery of injustice operate in plain sight. Smooth, practiced, unquestioned. When the defense finally spoke, the public defender's voice was thin, hesitant. He pointed out that Devin had been arrested with no stolen property on him, that no fingerprints had been collected from the alleged break-in site, that the police report itself contradicted key details. But his words felt like pebbles against stone, scattering without impact. Then came the moment that set the room alight. During a recess, the late-arriving juror, the one who had taken Elaine's place, leaned back in his chair, speaking in a low voice Elaine could still hear. "Kid's guilty as hell. You can see it in his face." The words hung in the stale courtroom air, louder than any gavel. Elaine's eyes lifted, locking on the juror. A few others shifted uncomfortably, but no one spoke. Elaine's breath slowed. Years of being underestimated had taught her the power of silence. But silence, she knew, was not the same as surrender. She rose from her bench and walked calmly to the bailiff. Her voice was quiet, deliberate. "I'd like to note something for the record." The bailiff blinked at her. "Ma'am, you're not." But before he could finish, the judge noticed. "Mrs. Turner, is there a reason you've interrupted proceedings?" His tone was clipped, paternal, meant to discipline. Elaine straightened her shoulders. "Yes, Your Honor. One of your jurors has spoken aloud about the defendant's guilt before deliberations have begun." She let the words settle, unhurried, precise. "That compromises the integrity of the jury." A ripple spread through the courtroom. The smirk vanished from the juror's face. The prosecutor stiffened, her pearl earrings catching the light. Judge Whitmore's lips pressed into a thin line, his authority challenged in his own domain. "Mrs. Turner," he said, voice rising just enough to echo, "you are not seated in that box. You are not a juror in this case." Elaine's eyes held his, calm, unwavering. "No," she said evenly, "but I am a citizen of this county, and I know enough to recognize when justice is already being decided before it's heard." The silence that followed was heavy, unbroken for a long, stretching beat. Finally, the judge's gavel came down, sharp and angry. "Order in this court." His voice thundered, but it carried something else now, a tremor beneath the power. Elaine returned to her seat without another word, her back straight, her face unreadable. Around her, the spectators shifted, some whispering, others stealing glances at her with something that looked almost like hope. Devin, the boy on trial, lifted his eyes for the first time, watching her as if she cracked open a window in a suffocating room. What Elaine had done seemed small, just words spoken at the right moment. But in a system built on silence, it was a tremor, and tremors had a way of growing into earthquakes. The courtroom had resumed, but the atmosphere was different now, stretched thin like glass about to crack. The judge's gavel had restored order, yet eyes kept sliding toward Elaine as if the room had discovered a center of gravity it hadn't expected. Devin's trial trudged forward, evidence introduced, witnesses questioned, the rhythm of procedure marching on, but the memory of Elaine's words lingered, humming under every sentence. At the lunch recess, Elaine stayed behind, seated in the back pew, her purse resting neatly in her lap. She watched the lawyers file out. The bailiff stretched his shoulders. The clerk shuffled papers with more force than necessary. Judge Whitmore descended from the bench and disappeared into chambers, his robe swishing like a curtain closing. When the room had mostly emptied, a young reporter approached her. His press badge swung nervously on a lanyard around his neck. "Ma'am," he began, almost whispering. "That was brave. Do you mind if I get your name?" Elaine looked at him, her gaze steady. She could feel the weight of choice in the question: remain invisible, as she had most of her life, or allow herself to be named, known. After a pause, she said quietly, "Elaine Turner." The syllables seemed to settle into his notebook with finality. He nodded, thanked her, and slipped out, leaving her alone again. When court reconvened, the judge was visibly tighter, his tone sharper, his patience thinner. Elaine noticed it in the clipped way he questioned the defense, the dismissive hand he raised when objections were made. The arrogance of authority was cracking, frustration bleeding through. And then it happened. The defense attorney, overworked, underprepared, misstated a point of law about admissibility of evidence. The prosecutor pounced, smirking as she corrected him, and Judge Whitmore leaned forward to deliver a scolding. Before he could finish, Elaine's voice cut through, calm and measured. Rule 403 of the Federal Rules of Evidence governs that, Your Honor. The word stunned the room. Heads turned. The defense attorney blinked. Even the prosecutor's smirk faltered. The judge froze, his eyes narrowing toward the back of the courtroom. Mrs. Turner, he said, his voice icy, you are out of order. Elaine stood, smoothing her skirt, and addressed him with a composure that silenced the whispers rising around her. With respect, Your Honor, I am not out of order. I am quoting your own rules. The defense misapplied the standard. You were about to confirm an error that would prejudice this case. The judge's face flushed, a deep crimson against the white collar of his robe. And how, he demanded, would you know such a thing? For a moment, the room seemed to hold its breath. Elaine's eyes did not waver. Because I earned my law degree from Howard University School of Law in 1985, she said, her voice even deliberate, every word landing like a stone in still water. I may have chosen a life in education, but I know the rules of evidence. I know the system, and I know when it betrays its duty to the truth. The silence that followed was heavier than any gavel strike. The court reporter's fingers stilled on the keys. Devin sat straighter in his chair. The jurors shifted uncomfortably, as if realizing they were no longer passive participants, but witnesses to a reckoning. Judge Whitmore's mouth opened, then closed. For the first time, he looked less like a man in control, and more like one standing on unstable ground. Elaine did not raise her voice. She did not smile. She simply returned to her seat, folding her hands neatly in her lap, her gaze forward. The room, however, had shifted. The power that had humiliated her hours before was now bending, uncertain, caught in the presence of a woman it had underestimated. From that moment, Elaine was no longer just a dismissed juror or a retired principal. She was something else, something the town would not be able to ignore. By the time the sun dipped low behind the courthouse, turning the tall windows into squares of amber light, whispers of Elaine Turner's stand had already leaked into the streets. A young woman in the gallery, her phone tucked low against her thigh, had captured the exchange on video. The moment Elaine corrected the judge, her voice steady, the revelation of her law degree spoken into a room that hadn't expected her to hold such authority. The clip spread quickly. By nightfall, it was online, tagged and reshared, the caption blazing, "Retired principal shuts down judge in open court." At first, Elaine knew nothing of it. She returned home, as she always did, to her roses in her quiet kitchen. She slipped off her shoes, set her purse on the table, and lit a candle against the soft hum of cicadas outside. She was making tea when her daughter Alicia burst through the door, still in scrubs, her phone glowing in her hand. "Ma!" Alicia said, her voice sharp with disbelief. "You're on the internet. You're everywhere." Elaine frowned. "What are you talking about?" Alicia thrust the screen toward her. There, grainy but unmistakable, was Elaine herself, standing in the courtroom, her words clear, calm, undeniable. The video had already drawn thousands of views, comments flooding in, "Queen," "Legend," "Protect her at all costs." Others carried a different tone. She should have been removed from the court. Out of line. Elaine's hands tightened slightly around the mug she held. She hadn't intended to become a spectacle. She had spoken because silence would have made her complicit. But now, her words were no longer hers alone. By morning, reporters stood at the courthouse steps. Microphones bristled like weeds as they asked questions. Who was Elaine Turner? Why had she spoken? Did she plan to challenge the judge formally? Some spoke of her with admiration, others with thinly veiled irritation. In the neighborhood, things moved differently. Malik arrived on her porch before school, holding his phone high, eyes wide. "Miss Turner, everybody's talking about you. They're saying you shut the judge down like it was nothing." His grin was wide, but behind it Elaine saw something else. Pride, The kind that made young people stand a little taller, believe a little more in their own voices. Not everyone was pleased. Down at the diner, two men in ball caps muttered over coffee that some folks don't know their place. At the courthouse, clerks exchanged tight-lipped looks when Elaine walked in the next day. The air had grown colder, sharper, like winter had crept into the building overnight. That afternoon, Elaine received a call from a name she hadn't heard in years. Michael Grant, a civil rights attorney she'd known in law school. His voice was low but urgent. "I saw the footage, Elaine. What you did matters. But you stepped into something that doesn't forgive easily. If you want, I can help. There are others watching that county. Others who've been waiting for someone to crack it open." Elaine listened, the weight of his words sinking deep. She thought of Devin, of the other children who had passed through her classrooms only to vanish into courtrooms like this one. She thought of the portraits of judges hanging on courthouse walls, each face a reminder of generations of power that had never been questioned. "I didn't mean to start anything," she said softly. Michael's pause was long, thoughtful. That's the thing about truth. Once it's spoken, it doesn't belong to just you anymore. That night, as Elaine stood in her garden, the glow of her granddaughter's laughter mixing with the hum of crickets, she realized the life she had built on quiet dignity had been pulled into a different kind of light. She had not asked for it. She had not wanted it. But now her silence, or her speech, carried weight beyond her own life. The town was listening. The world was beginning to. And with attention came both danger and possibility. Twin shadows moving beside her. The courthouse buzzed differently now. Reporters lingered at the steps, their cameras perched like hungry birds. Inside, the clerks moved briskly, whispering when Elaine walked by. What had begun as a single objection spoken in a calm, steady voice had grown into something larger, something the town could not quite contain. Elaine, however, remained deliberate. She did not let the attention rush her. Instead, she returned home each night, sitting at her dining room table surrounded by stacks of manila folders, old yearbooks, and yellowing newspaper clippings. She had begun to gather not only her own notes but the stories of others, families of students who had disappeared into the justice system, neighbors who had watched their sons sentenced on flimsy evidence. When Michael Grant arrived from Atlanta, carrying his briefcase and his quiet fire, Elaine opened the door like welcoming an old friend. They sat together in her kitchen, the smell of coffee and fried chicken drifting through the room, her granddaughter's laughter echoing faintly from the yard. Michael spread documents across the table, sentencing records, arrest statistics, evidence of juror strikes. Elaine leaned forward, her glasses low on her nose, scanning line by line. "They've been striking black jurors at triple the rate," Michael said, tapping the papers with his pen. "No way it's coincidence. And Hensley, she's built her career on locking up kids like Devin. Judges like Whitmore let her do it without blinking." Elaine nodded, her eyes sharp, focused. "Then we need more than outrage. We need proof they can't dismiss. Patterns, numbers, names." For nights they worked. Elaine called on her old network, teachers, parents, pastors, asking for records, testimony, even scraps of memory that might connect. One woman brought her a folder of letters her son had written from prison, describing how the jury deliberated for only 20 minutes before finding him guilty. Another man, eyes tired, spoke of a plea bargain withdrawn the morning of trial, leaving his nephew with a decade-long sentence. Elaine cataloged everything with the precision of the educator she had always been. She built timelines, cross-reference files, highlighted contradictions. Where others saw scattered stories, she saw a system. Meanwhile, the courthouse tightened its grip. Judge Whitmore began dismissing courtroom visitors more quickly, cutting recesses short, barking orders with an edge of defensiveness. D.A. Hensley doubled down in interviews, calling Elaine a distraction from the real issues. But each denial only fed the hunger of journalists digging deeper. One afternoon, as Elaine walked her car, a voice called out from across the lot. It was the white juror who had taken her seat that first day. His expression was tight, defensive. "You think you're making a difference?" he spat. "You're just stirring up trouble. Folks like you always do." Elaine paused, her keys in hand, the sun low and hot against her skin. She did not answer him. She simply looked at him, her silence heavier than any retort, and slid into her car. Some battles, she knew, were not worth words. That evening, Michael placed a thick folder on her table. "This is enough," he said. "With this, we can file a motion to the state bar. It won't just be about Devin. It'll be about the whole system here." Elaine traced the edges of the folder with her fingertips. She thought of the risk, the hostility already bubbling, the glances that followed her in the grocery store, the possibility of retaliation. Yet she also thought of Malik, of Devin, of the countless children she had promised, quietly in her heart, that she would not let this town break. She closed the folder with a decisive snap. "Then let's give them something they can't ignore." Her voice was steady, but inside her chest, the air trembled with something fierce. Not anger, not fear, but resolve. The kind of resolve that did not shout, but endured. The kind that bent systems until they cracked. The county hearing was held in the largest chamber of the courthouse, a space usually reserved for ceremonial events. Swearing-ins, retirement celebrations, the rare visiting senator. That morning, the pews filled before the doors even opened. Students from Carver High pressed against the back wall, their backpacks at their feet. Retired teachers clustered together, whispering. Families who had lost sons and brothers to the system sat stiff and watchful. Cameras lined the aisles, their red lights blinking steadily. The air buzzed with anticipation, like the moment before a storm breaks. At the front, Judge Harold Whitmore sat not behind his high bench, but at a long table, his face red and pinched, his hands folded too tightly. Beside him, D.A. Claire Hensley adjusted her pearl earrings, her jaw clenched as if she were preparing for battle. On the opposite side sat Elaine Turner, flanked by Michael Grant and two young civil rights attorneys. She wore a simple navy suit, her hair braided into the same crown she had worn in classrooms for decades. In front of her rested the thick folder she and Michael had assembled. Records, testimony, numbers that spoke louder than any speech. The chair of the Oversight Committee banged her gavel. "We are here today to review allegations of systemic bias, jury tampering, and prosecutorial misconduct within this county. Mrs. Turner, you may begin." Elaine rose slowly, her palms flat against the table for balance, and faced the room. Her voice, when it came, was low but carried steady as stone. "I have spent my life teaching children that truth matters. That justice is not about who has the loudest voice, but who has the clearest conscience. I believe that. I still believe it. But this courthouse has betrayed those words." She opened the folder, lifted a page, and read aloud. Sentencing records showing black defendants punished with double the time of their white counterparts for the same crimes. She held up letters from families, testimony from dismissed jurors, a chart of strikes that eliminated black jurors at rates too high to dismiss as chance. One by one, she laid the papers down like evidence in a trial, each thud against the table echoing in the chamber. These are not numbers. They are people. They are lives that have been stolen, futures cut short. I sat in that courtroom and watched a boy, 16 years old, treated as guilty before his case had begun. I heard a juror declare his verdict before deliberations. I watched the judge dismiss my voice because it did not fit the order of things. Her eyes lifted then, pinning Whitmore in his seat. But I am not here to ask permission to speak. I am here to demand accountability. The room erupted in murmurs, then applause that quickly grew, clapping echoing off the walls until the gavel slammed down for order. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras tilted forward. Whitmore's face flushed darker. "This is outrageous," he barked. "You are undermining the integrity of this court." Michael leaned forward, his voice sharp. "With respect, Judge, the integrity of this court was undermined long before Mrs. Turner spoke. What she presented today is evidence, undeniable, verifiable evidence. This committee will have no choice but to act." For a moment, the chamber felt suspended, the air taut. Then the chairwoman spoke. "The committee will review these records. Effective immediately, Judge Whitmore, you are suspended pending investigation. District Attorney Hensley, your conduct is likewise under review." Gasps rippled through the room. Hensley stiffened, her mouth opening in protest, but the sound was drowned by the noise of the crowd. Cheers, sobs, the release of something that had been trapped too long. Elaine did not smile. She stood perfectly still, her hands folded before her, her gaze calm. She had not come for spectacle. She had come for truth. And in that chamber, beneath portraits of men who had ruled unchallenged for generations, the truth had been spoken. So clearly it could not be silenced. For Devon, for Malik, for every child whose face she had ever looked into and promised that justice was real, Elaine had delivered proof that dignity could break walls no gavel could hold up. The town felt different in the weeks that followed. It wasn't sudden, not a revolution with banners and parades, but quieter shift, like the air clearing after a long storm. The courthouse, once a place where so many had walked in fear, became crowded with observers now. People filling benches to watch hearings that once passed unnoticed. Reporters still lingered outside, microphones ready, but they no longer asked Elaine for comment. They'd learned she had said all she needed to. Judge Whitmore resigned before the investigation concluded. District Attorney Hensley faced hearings of her own, her reputation splintering under the weight of what Elaine's evidence had uncovered. But Elaine didn't linger on their downfall. She thought instead of the letters she now received, notes from strangers, from former students who thanked her for proving that silence was not the same as powerlessness. At home, her kitchen table bore the marks of all those late nights, coffee stains, pen scratches, papers piled high. Now, it was bare again, save for a vase of fresh lilies Devon had placed there. He stopped by more often these days, bringing his guitar, strumming while Elaine hummed along softly. Malik still struggled some nights, still carried the weight of his trial like a scar no one else could see, but there was a new steadiness in him, too. He talked about college again. One evening, Elaine sat on her porch as the sun dipped low, painting the sky with streaks of gold and violet. Children's laughter drifted from down the street. A breeze carried the faint scent of barbecue from a neighbor's yard. She closed her eyes and let the sound settle into her. For decades she had taught children to believe in justice, even when she sometimes doubted herself. Now she knew justice was not a destination, not something handed down like a gift. It was a struggle, carried day by day, 1 inch by inch by those willing to stand steady when the world told them to bow. Her phone buzzed on the table beside her. A message from a former student, now a lawyer in Atlanta. Saw the hearing. You gave me my voice. Elaine smiled, her eyes damp but unashamed. The porch light flickered on as the sun sank, and she sat there, hands folded in her lap, listening to the hum of her neighborhood, the place she had chosen, the people she belonged to. The fight was not over. She knew that. It never truly would be. But something had shifted. She had not raised her voice, had not raised a fist. She had raised the truth. And the truth, once spoken, could not be buried again. Elaine lifted her chin, the crown of braids gleaming faintly in the twilight. Whatever came next, for her, for this town, for the children watching, she knew one thing would remain. Dignity could not be taken. It could only be lived again and again until it reshaped the world. And for the first time in a long while, as the cicadas began their evening chorus, Elaine Turner let herself rest.